Welcome back to the Table Rush Talk Show, where we dive deep into the world of entrepreneurship, marketing, and personal growth. I'm your host, Misha Zvagantsov, and today's guest is Brian, oh my gosh, Seidensticker.
You got it. You got it. Well,
Yes,
with your last name, I'd say you got me beat on the pronunciation.
right? That's how I'm pretty good with last names. I'm like phonetic. It's usually phonetic, and we make it a lot harder than it needs to be. Probably just like lien investing, which we're going to dive into. Brian, you are the founder of Tax Sale Resources and Mount North Capital. You have helped investors fund over 23 million in distressed properties, and you are here to share how everyday investors can use tax liens and creative financing to build real wealth without the Wall Street roller coaster. Yes?
That's the goal. Absolutely.
Amazing. So let's kick things off, Brian. First off, welcome to the show. And next, tell us exactly what you do and why it matters for people who are looking to grow their wealth through real estate.
Well, thanks, Misha, for having me on. I'm excited. Exactly what I do. It's funny. My daughter asked me that in the car yesterday, and I struggled with explaining what I do to an 8-year-old. I think at the heart of it, we're a data software analytics provider that happens to have capital available to investors as well, and why that matters is in the tax sale space. Learning what to do right is step number one. That's one piece that we don't provide is the education or the coaching. But what we do provide is once you know what you're doing, all of the other tools that you need to be successful, that think of it as we provide all of those tools in some ways, a partnership structure in order for folks to be successful in the space.
Cool. So someone's coming to you who is interested in tax liens or tax lien investing. Excuse me. It is early 7 a.m. here, so my words might. But anyway, they're already being coached up by somebody. They already have an idea that they want to invest in tax liens, and then you're helping fund that in essence. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Right. So partly right. I'll take one wider swath that it's tied to tax sales, right? So there's tax liens and there's tax deeds, and there's this middle ground that we call redeemable deeds, and each state essentially has a slightly different process, and we put that all in one. This is what humans like to do, right? Categorize things, and so we put all that in one big category that we call tax sales. And ideally, yes, the folks that are coming to us already know what they're doing. Now, we certainly have some great resources that don't cost anything. I do a podcast and interview attorneys across the country, learning about how the industry works in their specific state, and we've engaged attorneys and paid for white papers that we make available. And so there's a lot of resources to learn the nitty gritty. But for folks that are learning for someone that I think there's people that want to learn themselves, and we can be a great resource for that way, right? People that are looking to pay somebody to teach them what to do and to hold their hand through the process. There are services out there like that. That's just not what we do. And so ideally, to answer your question, yes, folks know what they're doing, at least enough to be dangerous when they come into our realm of products that we have available. And then we have all of the tools in order for them to be successful. So if I were to liken it to, mining, we provide the picks and the shovels and the wheelbarrows, right? And then we also happen to have capital. And so if you need to get started, we have the capital, to start your mine if you want to look at it that way. And so, the platform tracks, where these sales are happening, the properties available in those sales, all the property details. It's similar to, I call it like a Zillow for for those that are familiar with Zillow, but it's specific to the tax sale space, right? And that capability just simply didn't exist before we got started. And then we strapped on the ability to fund not everything. We really focus on the tax deed side of it, and I don't know how deep you want to get down on these rabbit holes, Misha. We could spend days and hours kind of going through nitty gritty, but tax liens are much more of a passive note investing where you're buying interest in a property. You're not actually buying the property. Usually it's a very small fraction of the value that you're into that note. I call them micro mortgages, if for anybody that's familiar with mortgage investing or note investing. And then there's the deeds where you're buying the properties themselves. And the capital side, software and data wise, we track both, right? But on the capital side, we're focused much more on enabling tax deed investors to scale their business, because that's a segment where banks don't currently touch those types of assets from the auctions today. And that's where we've provided the help to those folks.
So anybody watching, listening right now, you can go to taxsaleresources.com, taxsaleresources.com, and dive deeper into what Brian is talking about. So I heard two main things. One, buying the tax lien, which is a passive income stream, and then or buying the deed, I think you said, which is actually taking ownership of the property. Let's dive into tax liens really quick. It's, I believe your words are, one of the most overlooked ways to build wealth. I'm not quoting you exactly, but is this a hidden gem of a strategy, or is this where you like to play most, or the deed acquisition? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, tax liens can be. It really depends on what your appetite as an investor is. I think most folks can self-categorize themselves, or do they want to be very active in managing the real estate side of it? It's not a passive investment when you're buying tax deeds. You're buying the property. You're going to get notices. You're going to have to deal with the county or the city and the code violations, et cetera. Is anything but passive, right? On the lien side, it's much more passive. You're essentially lending the county, right, or the jurisdiction money, right, and you're going to get an interest rate, and hopefully that lien eventually redeems. You get your principal back, you get your interest, right, and you do that again, right? And so, depending on what goals are for each investor, do they want to be very hands off and passive, right? Then the liens are great, right? If you want to be very hands on and active, and I think a very key definition between the two is typically the earning potential and what you could potentially make from each investment is much higher on the tax deed side than it is on the tax lien side as well. And so I can't say one is necessarily better than the other. They each have their advantages, right? And I think it's everybody that is listening can say, hey, this is a better focus for me because, right? And they should be able to answer those. What I can't do is tell anybody like, you should do this because, right? I think that's a recipe for disaster. People usually have to decide how active they want to be. And if they want to be very hands off because they've got another job and they just want to buy liens, then focus on liens, right? If you want to make this your full-time job and the earning potential is higher, right, then tax deeds might be better for you. So that'd be a way to kind of categorize.
Cool. I love that. And you don't care which. You're like, hey, we've got this resource, tax sales resources. Again, everybody watching, listening, go to taxsaleresources.com, and you are hoping people utilize your tool to help them. Hey, I'm all in on lien, the tax lien investing. Great. Use our tool. I'm all in on trying to, get houses at auction, get the deed. Great. Use our tool. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say?
Correct. Yeah. We track both auctions. And so there's about 9,000 auctions we track annually across the country. And that's in about just over 5,000 we call jurisdictions. Sometimes it's at the county level, sometimes it's at the city level. Some states do it on both levels. And so we track all of that. And so whether you are wanting to focus on tax liens or tax deeds, then the tools that we provide, can enable you in either case. Size-wise, both of those industries, roughly $4 to $5 billion sold annually. So there's ample size, and it is a niche market, and obviously a very small fraction of real estate market in general in the U.S., but still sizable to where if you're looking to place several $100,000, $3 million, very doable. I think some of the largest investors in the tax lien space place over 100 million or a couple $100 million a year. So it's a lot bigger than I think people realize.
It's awesome. So I'm looking at taxsaleresources.com right now, and your headline is, or sub-headline, call it what you want, join the 26,000 plus other investors who have reclaimed their time and increased their returns using the right tools for the job. And you've got a research tab, a management tab, financing tab, a trade tab. I don't know. Here you go. In 5 minutes or less, break down tax sales resources. What's it going to do for the person that's like, I know I'm guessing you, great place to start actually, even if someone's new, because they can prowl around and learn and do searches and see what's out there. Or if you're seasoned, it's like, oh my gosh, here's the golden goose tool almost, where you've, like you said, you've got access to 9,000 municipalities or however you said that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think where to start, right, is as far as for everybody, I would check out the resources, tab. There's several different things in there. We have a blog, we've got a podcast that you can access, and we break everything down by how advanced is the information going to be in there, right? Some of it is very much for beginners, which is where you want to start, and some of it would be probably too dense for somebody just learning about tax sales to digest, right? For example, listening to an attorney talk about the intricacies of enforcement on the backside of a lien in Louisiana is not for the faint of hearted for multiple reasons. One is that, I kind of have a sick mind in that I geek out on that stuff, and the attorneys that I'm talking to do as well. And from a learning perspective is great. But I can definitely tell you from firsthand experience in trying to describe all that, and my wife listened to it. If you're not really interested in that segment, it is a great way to fall asleep at night. Start listening to some of those more advanced podcasts that I've hosted. So start with the beginners. So anyway, the resources, obviously I'm biased, Misha, but the resources is a great place to start. I think the next major one to check out would be to actually log in and look at the portal and see, what is available out there. I think folks that are interested in real estate, the big topic is what's off market versus on market. If it's on market, you can find it on Zillow, right? Meaning if it's listed on MLS, it's, darn near guarantee it's going to be on Zillow, which is a great resource. But there's a ton of properties that are going up for sale that are not, quote unquote, on market, right? And I would say all tax sale properties do not fall in the on market. None of them are going to be listed on the MLS, or if they are, it's more of a coincidence, not intentional. And so if you're looking for the off market opportunities, then you can use the portal to start looking through, geographically, maybe profile them, right? We track commercial properties, we track vacant land, we track single family homes, right? All of that stuff ends up in a tax sale. And so you can really narrow it down to what might be interesting to you. The other thing to note for those that just get in the space is sales occur in cycles. There's not, for example, you're only going to find properties in Nebraska for a few weeks a year because that's the only time that by statute they have their sales. The rest of the year, you're not going to find anything in Nebraska. On the flip side, Florida has a very large volume of lien sales once a year in the May-June timeframe, but they have tax deed sales the rest of the year. So you're always going to find something for sale in Florida. And all the other states kind of fall in between. And so,
and Florida, hold on really quick.
Yeah.
Florida's just kind of a shit show. Sorry, I don't swear so much. So there's always something available in Florida.
Yes. Yeah. It's by far the largest market, by far the largest delinquency rate. There's lots of theories behind why that is. The system itself is very effective and I think fair in how it enforces, right, the collection of those taxes in Florida. But yes, to use your words, Florida, from a tax delinquency standpoint is a bit of a shit show, but the process is pretty good. And so if you're an investor looking, at Florida, there's always something to look at in Florida.
Yeah, I was taking a more broader overview of Florida itself. There's always some shenanigans going on in Florida. Like, if there's chaos brewing of some sort in the world, it's like its origins perhaps are rooted, or the systemization of that chaos is rooted in Florida.
Yeah, it's a mini. I call it, it's a little mini United States down there in Florida. I mean, you've got basically the east coast of the U.S. migrates to the east coast of Florida, right? And you have the Midwest of the U.S. that somehow makes it to the west coast of Florida. So you've got a lot of mixed methodologies, mentalities, right, in a pretty good melting pot. And I'd say that's America right there.
That's America right there, man. It is just percolating down there. And
Yeah,
then plenty of immigrants too, still. Like it's a great access point for that. And I'm all for it. I mean, America was built on that. So I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent. It's just the facts. Just the facts, man.
just the facts. Yep.
Yeah. Well, cool. You want to, I think we're getting a little, uh, uh, what am I trying to say? We were maybe getting into a little into the weeds a little bit too much, maybe on the details.
Mm-hmm.
But tell me, like the perfect person well, you tell me which direction do you want to go. So at some point, you're like, oh my God, the tax sale space, and you're like, bam, like there is massive opportunity here. Why don't we start there? Talk to me there. What what was the one moment that changed everything where you're like, wait a
For
minute.
me, yeah. So yeah, going back a few years, I've been in the space, 18 years now, which time goes too fast, my friend. But for me, I fell into this on accident, really on the wrong side of a tax lien. I was flipping properties as a side gig back in the mid 2000s, and ended up upside down on a property we were doing in Montana, which is where I'm originally from. And Montana has some odd statutes where every potential tax lien buyer has to send their own certified letter. Usually it's done by the county, right? Hey, your taxes are delinquent, pay them or you're going to have this penalty. But in Montana, you do get that from the county, but you also get these various levels of threatening letters from every investor that might buy your tax lien, right? And so I got a slew of these letters in the mail, which is what really, I guess, triggered me to investigate it further. Otherwise, I would have just probably assumed it was a county thing and gone on my merry way. But the fact that I got so many from different groups made me go, what is this all about? And did my research and eventually figured out that, this tax lien thing is a real thing. There's actually investors that buy a lot of volume in this space, and watching the Great Recession take place, I said, well, maybe flipping properties isn't my side gig anymore. Maybe buying tax liens needs to be. And at that time, I was happy with, it was 10% was roughly the return that you could make in Montana buying tax liens, and that certainly looked a lot better than the negative return I was getting on the couple properties that I was in at the moment. And so, essentially worked through that downside, raised a family friend money. It wasn't even technically a fund, but started buying tax liens, and that's how I got in the space. And it's obviously evolved a lot since then, but I don't think anybody that gets in the space like sought it out from childhood of I want to be a tax lien investor and make make my fortune doing it that way. I think it's it just kind of falls in people's lap, and either you roll with it or not. So that's what it was for me. Now, I guess to talk a little bit more about how Taxel Resources came to be, Misha, was I had a friend actually suggest I built a tool. It was really an internal tool. Now there's Google Drive, there's OneDrive. There's a lot better tools for doing what we needed, which is just simply sharing information between myself and my staff. It was my sister who was helping me out, and I was in Arizona and she was in Montana, and just needed a simple way to do that without emailing an Excel file back and forth, which is miserable. And so I built a simple website, and all we did was just track when and where these auctions were taking place and collect the list of properties, because even that didn't exist back in 2008-9. And a guy at a conference suggested I make that available to the public, and maybe I earn some revenue and cover my overhead in doing that. And that's essentially how what became known as Tax Lien Database originally was born. And then I connected with a gentleman who became a future partner. What he was doing was taking all that information, and he was in New Jersey specifically, then doing all of the property research, right? So not just the list of properties, but which ones are single family, which ones are vacant land, which ones are commercial. And we said, hey, why don't we do what I'm doing and combine it with what you're doing, and instead of just New Jersey, let's do this on a nationwide scale. And that's really how Taxel Resources was born. Now to really round out my initial investment history in it is by 2012, for two reasons. The revenue that I was getting on the software side outweighed what I was getting from my, few taxi investments in Montana. But then also we actually started getting some customers interested in investing in Montana. I didn't want to be at a conflict of interest, so I exited buying tax liens directly myself, back in that time frame, and the software exploded, and that's kind of what led us to eventually providing a capital product, which I know is a separate product. So that was my journey, right? I think for anybody else that is learning about tax sales for the first time today, kind of going, what is this all about? I think I've kind of described tax liens versus tax deeds enough to scratch that itch a little bit. But the next question I typically get is, well, what can I earn from this investment, right? And so I'm always a little nervous because nothing's guaranteed, and you can certainly buy tax liens and deeds that are worth absolutely nothing, and it's a waste of money. But I think if you're going to do this at scale, right, and you know what you're doing, then right in today's world, making a 7-8% return on the tax lien side, right, the passive investment, is a fairly realistic expectation. And on the tax deed, making mid-upper 20s, right, and maybe even more than that, depending on where you're at and how much you understand and can be creative, right? And real estate, I've found, is the more creative you are on your disposition, the more you can potentially make. And so people on that side can make mid-upper 20s or more, right, if you buy correctly. Obviously, higher risk, higher potential return. So for those that are listening and kind of say, okay, this sounds interesting. Okay, those returns sound interesting. What do I do next? I think the next thing that you need to do is really go get educated, right? And you can start with our free resources, right? There's 3 videos on there that kind of go through the basics of tax liens, the basics of tax deeds, the basics of redeemable deeds, to understand all those. But then there's a whole litany of services out there that do that coaching and that teaching, right? And they will take you through a more formal course. And if you're on the tax lien side of it, there's actually an association called the National Tax Lien Association, NTLA, which I'm actually on the board of. And they have a great, I think they call it an NTLA University for tax lien investors that walks through all the nitty gritty. There's a price to it. I can't remember exactly what it costs. It's fairly reasonable, but that will take you, by the end of that, you will be educated enough to come back to Tax Resources and know what to do with the tools that we have. There are similar resources out there, coaches, educators on the tax deed side as well. So definitely check those out. And I would go through that education and learning process before you dive in and buy your first one, for sure.
Cool. Quick question. So tax lien, you buy the tax lien, and then in effect, the owner of the house is paying you you're just getting paid
interest.
Yep. Cool. The tax sale is where the property is being foreclosed due to the fact that there's delinquent taxes.
Yeah. So just to kind of describe, I'll say, property tax enforcement process, and I think it'll help understand what a lien is versus a deed. So in all the states today, there's grumblings of removing property taxes, but in all the states today, there's property taxes. And I think my mom told me a long time ago, there's two guarantees in life, right? One is death, everyone dies. The other one is taxes. Everyone's going to pay taxes of some sort. And so, with the advent of property taxes, that is what funds local government, right? Pave the roads, pay the policemen, pay the teachers, pay the firemen, and in general balance the budget for counties typically. And what happens if you don't pay your taxes? The counties are looking at that going, well, how do I need that money, right? If these people don't pay their taxes, what's the incentive for everybody else? Why would they pay taxes? So there's got to be an enforcement mechanism in place. And that's really what tax sales are, is the enforcement mechanism to ensure people pay their property taxes. So what typically happens is For the tax lien, what the county does is they say, hey, there's this small portion of our budget that we didn't collect our property taxes for. We need that, right? And so they go to a third party investor, right? And so the investor's in this equation, and they say, hey, investor, if you could give me, that amount that was due for my taxes to balance my budget, instead of me keeping that penalty that, because the homeowner is going to have to pay some sort of penalty for paying late, right? That's what happens when you pay late. And the county's saying, hey, instead of me collecting that late payment fee, I'll give that to you as the investor. That's your return, right? And that's how the tax lien process works. So the county then puts a tax lien on the property, just like a mortgage, not just, but very similar to like a mortgage. They sell that lien to a third party, and then there basically is an agreement that says, hey, lien investor, when the property owner pays their taxes, which 99% of people do eventually, then whatever excess amount that they pay, the penalty, I'm going to give that to you, right? That's tax liens. And so the tax lien investor does not have any ownership in the property. They own a lien and they have an interest in that property. The advantage is that lien typically has superiority over a mortgage and over most other liens. And so if and when that property ever sells or whatever happens, if there's an enforcement, then the tax lien holder makes their money at that moment in time. So that's tax liens. Now, the tax deed is exactly as you had hinted. So the property owner has only so much time in order to pay their taxes. And it varies by state, but anywhere from 6 months to 5 years, right? Depending on the state statutes. But if they don't and they never pay their taxes, then there's the opportunity for the lien holder to start a foreclosure process, just like if you didn't pay your mortgage, and the mortgage holder has the right to start a foreclosure process. And that results in, that usually is a legal process, and that results in the sale of the property, and the sale of that property is what we call the tax deed auction. So now you're not just buying a lien on the property, you don't just have interest in the property, you're buying the property. You're getting a deed. Now, I don't know if we want to get down this rabbit hole, that deed is not the same deed that you're going to get through a standard real estate transaction. You're not getting a warranty deed with title insurance. The county's basically saying, hey, you paid me money, you own the property. But if anybody comes out and says they own the property too, you got to defend that. That's your problem, right? That's the sticking point with tax deeds. But that's the full process. Now, again, every state is slightly different, but where the tax lien falls into the equation versus the tax deed, that's how they're all kind of connected. Does that help?
That's amazing. Thank you. You said something at the very beginning that was interesting. You said it offhand. This is a great space because the mortgage companies aren't in it, or you said something like that.
Well, great space for I'm good at stories, Misha, but the fund that we operate called Mountain North Capital provides capital partnerships to tax deed investors. And it's great for us, right? And the fact that if people could go get bank financing for tax deeds, the fund wouldn't exist, quite frankly. But the reality is banks don't provide capital to buy tax deeds because they can't get insurable title, right? They don't get title insurance. They don't get that general warranty deed from the county. And so the bank doesn't, they just don't have, there's only so many hours in a day. They don't care to learn all the intricacies of what might be bad and what might be good. They just say, unless I can get title insurance, I'm out, right? And so, for people buying these tax deeds at auction, you have to have the cash. You can't use lender financing. And so historically, that's been a very big barrier for folks that are really good at what they do, right? They have a great model. Not everybody's got multi-millions of dollars in order to do a lot of properties at any given time. I mean, you're not just spending $5,000 for these tax deeds, you're spending tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars for these tax deeds. And so folks that are I'll say historically well-capitalized might have had maybe $500,000 that they're working with. They're still buying 2, 3, maybe 4 properties at a time. Then they have to have the cash to do the remodel. They have to have the cash in order to do what we call quieting the title, which is converting that deed from what you get from the county to one that is insurable and the bank would finance. That's a separate process. So you have to have a lot of cash, right? And that's where Mountain North Capital, when we initially were trying to get a bank convinced in financing the space and then eventually learn why they don't, Mountain of Capital is launched is as a way to enable those folks that know what they're doing and have a great model, and they just are cash limited in some way. Then we're partnering with them. So instead of doing 2, 3, 4 properties, they can do 9, 10, 11 properties at a time and really make it a full-time ordeal. So that's a little bit more about why banks aren't in the space and kind of how we've helped solve that problem as well.
Amazing. And you have now funded with Mount North Capital 23 million plus. You've helped people scale up 23 million in properties, buying 23 million worth of properties. Am I saying
yes?
that?
Well, it's that number. To give you an update, we just checked it the other day. We were at about 41, 42 million that we funded so far in the space. So we're growing quite a bit right now. And still that's a very small fraction of the, roughly $4 to $5 billion in tax deeds that are sold annually. But we feel like we are doing some great things and enabling, those local folks to do what they're doing just on a larger scale.
Amazing. I love it. I think I've got the full picture. Anybody watching, listening, hopefully has the full picture as well. Let's continue painting the picture. Who's the person? Let's talk about your perfect customer. So who's the person listening right now who should lean all the way into what you're saying? And is that going to be Mount North Capital as the perfect customer, or combination? Yeah, tax sales research. Go ahead.
I'd say anybody that understands real estate to some degree, whether or not you know a whole lot about tax sales in general yet, but as long as you understand the real estate side of it, the risks, the potholes that you can come across, and you've crossed that chasm. There's a big chasm for I think it's a mental chasm for most folks of making that first real estate investment purchase. It's a risk, right? And it can be a scary risk if it's something you've never done before. That's a hard thing to do. But for anybody that has done it at least once in any capacity, then they're pretty well in our bucket of somebody that we'd like to work with. The perfect customer, which if there's some listeners on here that are in this bucket, absolutely outstanding, right? Those that are existing tax deed investors, know what they're doing, right? They're looking for the tools to maybe venture out of their specific area and maybe looking for the capital to do that, right? Enable that. That would be our perfect customer. But honestly, Misha, there's just not many of those perfect customers, and we don't expect perfection. But for anybody else that at least has an interest and has done some not tax sale, but just real estate investment in general, and have listened enough to say, this is very interesting to me and I'd like to learn more, then that would be somebody that we'd love to talk to.
Cool. What type of investors are drawn to this kind of opportunity, and what level of experience do they need to get started?
On the lien side, we found most of them are in the finance sector to some degree. I'll say CPAs or professionals that really understand the investment in, I call paper, right? Buying notes, but understand like creative real estate investment to some degree. Then they're definitely drawn to the tax lien side of the space. On the tax deed side, it's just another avenue for real estate investors to buy properties at a deal, right? And that's really the biggest barriers is learning about what these are. How do I buy these properties and how do I fund them? But at the end of the day, they're just real estate investors that are using tax deeds as just another method for acquiring the properties, right? If you go back 10 years ago, not many people in the tax deed space, because the volume of mortgage foreclosure properties you could buy was just massive. And that was kind of the flood of everybody wanting to do the HGTV model, right? Of fix and flip and flop. And there's a million TV shows out there now, but buy a distressed property, right? In the worst property in the great neighborhood and make it the greatest property in that neighborhood. There's usually money to be made on that table. Most folks got in that space buying the mortgage foreclosures. And then as that inventory dried up, that's kind of where tax deeds started to become more and more popular. So for folks that are just interested in buying real estate in general in their market and have never heard of this as an avenue for doing that, then they would be, great candidates to look at this a little harder as well.
Perfect. What's the biggest reason people hesitate to explore tax lien investing? Is it fear of complexity, legalese, the unknown?
Definitely the unknown, right? And the unknown for many reasons. Of there's with tax deeds, most people can grasp a good grasp of how to underwrite real estate asset, right? What is the value of that property, right? That's not an easy concept, but it's a much more explainable concept of, well, look at the other properties around it. How does it compare? There's your value of that property, right? But with tax deeds, you have to underwrite it from two perspectives. There's that, and then you also have to underwrite it from a title perspective, and it's a title perspective that most people get scared of, right? Meaning, what other I call garbage do you have to deal with on that property once you get that deed from the county? And that unknown, it's really not that scary once you get to know what to look for. And most of them, even when you do encounter them, aren't detrimental. They can be, but they're more hurdles, not necessarily walls that you have to get over. But most people don't want to touch something they don't understand, right? And so people will hear of tax deeds, they'll do a little research, and they'll go, that's just not for me. And that might be the case. But if you're willing to do a little more homework, it could be a great opportunity, because that reason for why most people don't enter the space is why you can still get pretty decent deals in the market, where today finding deals in real estate in general is very difficult, right? But, if this were easy, everybody would be doing it. It's because it's hard. Some people are doing it, more are doing it today than 10 years ago, but it's not flooded with so much competition that you can't find any deals today.
It's like the rest of the market's that bloody red ocean,
Right.
but the tax lien investing is that hidden gem, and it's that unknown, it's that uninsurable title. My words, maybe you said it that way, but
Perfect. Yeah.
yeah, and the complexity. So there are all these opportunities, and if I'm hearing you right, it's like, yeah, those are just hurdles, and really, once you systemize your process around that hurdle, it's actually easy. It's just like, yep, there's that hurdle. This is what we do when that hurdle comes. Great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where our partnership, we have different levels of partnership, but when we partner with somebody on the capital side, we are also part of that solution in what to do at those scenarios. So you don't have to learn all of those lessons the hard way, meaning, and we've learned many the hard way, dealing with it firsthand of, well, I've never seen this before. What do you do in this scenario? Well, that's a knowledge point going forward. And so when we see that again, it can help the partners we're working with, when they encounter it, we can say, oh, well, this is how you deal with it. And they're not having to learn it the first time, every single time. We can be that partner that has that knowledge. And that's really one of the biggest benefits. That's hard to put a dollar number on, right? But one of the biggest benefits is just having, collectively the folks that we have on our team that you're working with, over 50 years of experience in this space. That's hard you can't repeat that overnight. It takes time to learn those lessons.
I love this because I literally was just at a marketing convention with 100 of my, closest marketing and entrepreneurial friends, and some of them were, let's call them fix and flippers, or finding those properties, rehabbing them, flipping them, or perhaps, well, finding a property at a good deal and then turning it into a rental and a passive income stream. But the main issue, I was in real estate as a loan officer from 2001 to about 2016, and coming out of that, I still have my eye on the market all the time. It seems like since coming out of 2008, when we had a glut of properties, right? There was too many properties, to all of a sudden the consistent theme for the last 15 years or what have you has been limited inventory. And so there's too much money chasing too many deals. But now we've got this tax lien opportunity where somebody who might have a system in place and is buying properties and is good at what they do, but these people literally said, hey, there's not enough deals out there. Now you're like, well, here's access to a whole other source of opportunities. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, exactly. And take it one step further, it's not just, hey, here's another space, right? We've been in the data analytics side of it as well. So we know what stuff is selling for where. So not only is, hey, here's a bucket of properties, right? We can actually tell people this property is likely going to be a better deal than this property if you're flexible, right? Hard to do that in a county, right? Because a county is going to be as competitive as it is, but we can point people and say, instead of this county, maybe look at these because the competition isn't as high there for whatever reason. And that's part of what we bring to the table in the partnership is not just the tools, not just the capital, but we also point people in the right direction, as long as they're flexible and where they're willing to go.
Well, that's amazing. What I'm like, wow. So off the top of your head, best county to go to right now for properties 200,000 or less.
Um, well, I don't want to give away all of our secret sauce, Misha. I do get that question regularly of like, okay, where's the best place to invest? And it's kind of a impossible to answer question because, well, what are you looking to do? Are you building a rental portfolio? Are you buying land? Are you looking for commercial? Are you just looking like for the best deal? I can tell you, you can buy vacant land in Arkansas for very small percentage of what its best value is. Now, reselling that property, right, and turning that into realized income might take you years, right? And so, is that the best opportunity out there? Maybe, right? And, on the flip side, there is a ton of volume of properties in Miami-Dade County, Florida, but good luck buying those less than 99% of market value, right? I guess they do happen here and then, but, there's a happy medium for everybody in the middle. And I've, done this kind of market analysis with, there's about 50 partners that we work with today. And that answer has been different for every single one. And so there is no perfect answer. So that's my official way of skirting that question, Misha. But the reality is there is not a single answer that is the same answer for everybody.
Hey, that's great. But I know that there was a county that came into your head right when I said that, where you're like, oh, this is where we're looking right now. You do
there's definitely specific states that we favor based on data and specific counties that we favor based on volume and data. But that's all part of kind of the unique piece of our partnership is you can find those yourself if you're willing to do the homework. It'll take you a long time piling through all that data. You might get lucky, right? And there's certainly local folks in those markets that are lucky enough to benefit from where they live. But for most folks, we have to point them in the right direction, and that's part of what we do.
Cool. And is that direction coming through the I'm sorry, the name of it's Mount North Capital. Am I saying that right?
Well, so that's the capital side of it. So the platform, right, our research platform, it used to be where we had a separate market analysis. Hey, here's results across the country, kind of baked into a report that people had to pour over, and then using that say, hey, here's the markets that I want to go to. We've since taken it one step further and built in that intelligence. I guess the current sexy terminology, AI, right? Fancy algorithms that are, using that data live in the system and saying, for the version of software that our partners are using, which is different, you can't go subscribe for this level of software. But for our partners, the system is actually telling them the likelihood this property is going to make it to auction based on the data that we have on it and what we think the sale price of that property is going to be. And then we take it one step further and tell them, based on our experience, here's a property score of that property. And we try it. So we enable folks with the software to say, target these types of properties. And so instead of having to pour through, 200,000-300,000 tax deed properties annually, they only have to look at a few hundred to buy the properties they're looking for at any given time. And that's kind of the power of the data side of what we do.
Amazing. taxsalesresources.com is the entry point into that data, and then you can pay for what level of access you get. So if you're like, I want that score, you maybe just have to pay a little bit more per month. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say?
I think if you're someone listening going, I like all of these things, how do I take advantage of all of these things? The program we call is called the Accelerator Program. And so if you start going to the website, you can email us, give us a call. It actually, even though we're a software company, we do have real people that answer phones. We're not Google. We're good luck connecting with anybody at Google, one of the largest companies in the world. I have no idea how to actually connect with them, but you can call us and just say, hey, I'm interested in the accelerator program, and they'll point you to the right person to talk to on our end.
Awesome. I love it. Do you hear people say, this sounds too good to be true, or I don't have time to learn it? Is that a common thing?
We do. I think the too good to be true to some degree, is pretty quickly answered in that, like, we don't do all of the work for you, right? It's still a lot of work that has to be done on your side, the investor side, right? To underwrite the properties, et cetera. And so it's not a get rich quick, easy, go buy a winning lottery ticket type of scenario. But there are certainly folks that get into it and then eventually go, hey, this is just more than I want to deal with. And that's the other side of our Mount North Capital, the fund that we operate. It is a 506c fund. And, so it's only available to accredited investors. And so, for folks that are accredited, want to take advantage of the space, like what we're doing, but just want to say, hey, I'd like to make a great return and let you do that work. They now for listeners, have a lot better understanding what the heck we're doing, right, at the end of the day. But you can invest in the fund on that side of it and be more hands-off for those folks.
Awesome. Love it. So the Mountain North Capital is your pool of money where you guys are doing your work. You're investing in these properties, doing these things. Passive investors can play the game by investing in that fund as long as they're an accredited investor. Yeah.
You got it. Exactly.
Awesome. And then the $41 million coming on $42 million as of this recording, is that where you're providing that capital? Is that outside of that fund or is it through the fund? I don't mean to get into the weeds.
No, that's all through that fund. You got it.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Awesome. Well, let's press on. I love this. Tell us about a client who got a huge win through your system or one of those, wow, this really works moments. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite stories to tell, just because it is really cool, and the partner that we're working with, Brad Norman is the gentleman's name. He is a real person. You can find him out there. I think he even actually has a pretty sizable Facebook group. But we started working with Brad initially when he was buying single family homes. He was building a rental portfolio, and we helped him grow that portfolio. And eventually he purchased some multifamily homes using our program as well. And so eventually he outgrew, I'll say, just tax deeds. And so I mentioned earlier, tax deed investors, they're just real estate investors using, tax deeds as just a way of, our program is not isolated to just tax deeds. And so he eventually used our program to buy some multifamily properties at a great deal, but they weren't tax sale properties. And so he continued to grow, and then eventually he built a reputation in this market that he's in. And I promised him I wouldn't tell exactly what market. It's fine if he ever wants to mention it, but the market that he's in, the city actually came to him and said, "Hey, we've got this commercial property that's a bit of a pain in the butt for us. We'd like you to buy that property and essentially remodel it." It was kind of a mainstay. It was an old newspaper headquarters downtown in this town. Beautiful brick building, and it was just essentially 95% of it is vacant. The newspaper was still the one remaining tenant. They were in one little corner in the bottom floor of a 6-floor building or 5-floor building. And the city had said, "Hey, we really would like to redo the downtown. We need somebody to take on this project." And it took a little while for Brad to convince us that, everything was going to work out. But eventually, we did assist him in purchasing that commercial building. It was a 53,000 square foot commercial building. He bought it. He negotiated the purchase when we bought it for just over $500,000, which is $10 a square foot for a relatively decent commercial building is crazy good deal. And he within 18 months, I think we last had it appraised for just over $2.5 million. So he did very well in that purchase, right? But and that purchase is not common, right? You can't expect to get in the space and go get that day one. I think the coolest part of that story is the fact that he was growing, we were growing with him, and it was a true partnership. going from buying, single family homes, which is a lot of people is very realistic, buy 5, 10, 15 single family homes, eventually buy 9 to 12 unit, you buy several of those, and then you build that reputation with a great community, and the community comes to you and says, hey, I got this great deal. It wasn't through a tax sale, but it was an amazing opportunity that we were able to grow with them on. And it's been a fun ride, and he's continued to grow his presence there. And now he's in the saying no to deals because he's got so many great ones being thrown at him. It really comes down to the operator, right? I think we enabled him, but he is that story. He is the one that built the relationships, and he's been very successful, and it's been fun to watch.
Amazing. A couple fun and useful questions. What's one creative financing trick or strategy that busy investors overlook but should absolutely be using?
Financing strategy. Well, I think, I guess, call it a shameless plug for our when we built our capital partnership program. There might have been others that have done the same thing, but to my knowledge, nobody was doing it the way we're doing it and the scale that we're doing it. And it truly is a partnership, meaning we're not a lender, we're not a traditional financing mechanism, right? We are partnering with folks, and you, with some skin in the game, right, through a deposit, as we call it, you can have access to a lot more buying power, right? And so folks that come to us and we partner with traditionally have, $200,000-$300,000 that they're, buying at tax sales with tax deeds, or just in traditional real estate acquisitions. And we say, okay, well, but, instead of, a couple $100,000, what if we give you $1 million in buying power, right? And so that opens up a whole lot of doors, right? When you can not only go to auction with a whole lot larger buying power, but buy assets at a price that eliminates a lot of the competition. There's a lot of people buying the properties sub 100,000, right? There's not a whole lot of people buying 500,000 to $2 million type properties because they just don't have the cash available. And so the deals that you get on those higher value properties goes up as well. And so that's really when we built the program, was to say, here's how we can do it within the fund that we have to make sure that we are secure, right? And the assets we're doing, right? But it's been a beautiful unplanned outcome, is enabling folks to be able to buy assets they've traditionally been required to avoid, for whether it's capital, usually it's capital, right? And so that's the capital partnership structure that we have is a very unique benefit that I think it takes a little bit, and that's why it's a one-on-one conversation with our folks to really get arms wrapped around it, but it can be a great relationship for folks to know what they're doing.
I love it. You are literally the creative financing trick or strategy.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, Mount North Capital is exactly.
Amazing. All right, quick rapid fire round. First thing that comes to your mind. Ready?
Ready as ever be.
Okay, favorite hidden city or county for tax sale deals?
Favorite hidden city. Well, I'll at least narrow it down by state. I think we have we like Georgia and Texas a lot for many reasons. And so I won't get down to the nitty gritty county, but as far as two states to kind of look at, those would be two that are worth looking at. Love
it. Worst property or lien you almost bought?
Well, I'll eliminate almost. Well, I guess there are worse. So we didn't buy this one, and so I'll go one level further. When counties break up their parcels, there's always going to be weird parcels that are split out, right? And chunks of sidewalk, mailboxes, swampland, right? And that's the thing. And then when I say you can buy a worthless lien and you can buy a worthless deed, right? Landlocked. And so I remember reading this story, and I'm like, I'm going to reference this story as much as I can, because a gentleman didn't do this research. I think it was a gentleman, bought a tax lien on what was essentially a mailbox. It was a 4 square foot area that wrapped around his mailbox. How that got parceled out individually, I have no idea. I don't know that backstory, but the person hadn't done the research. They just thought, hey, here's a cheap lien I can buy for less than $100. It's quote unquote guaranteed by the county, which is so untrue, but they had heard it. And then they went to time to file for a deed on the property. They filed for a deed on the property. No one bought the deed on it because everyone that's typically tax deed investing does the research, right? And so nobody bought it. So he ends up with a deed to this property. And then he finally goes and does his research and finds I own a mailbox, and he couldn't sell that property to anybody. I mean, he may have, I don't know if this is true, but he went to the homeowner and was like, hey, you want to buy your mailbox? If I was a homeowner, I'd just move my mailbox, right? I'm not going to buy that 4 square foot chunk back from you. But the amazing thing is that group or person, actually sued the county, for, I don't know exactly the wording, but basically blaming them for why could they sell a lien on a property. And I don't know the outcome of that lawsuit, but I believe it was sales are always a buyer beware scenario. If you don't do your research, it's your fault. It's not the county's fault. So know that is, and then the county's not trying to screw anybody over. They just have a list of parcel IDs. That's all they know about the property. So it's on you as the investor to do your research.
Cool.
That's not rapid fire, but a good story.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good story. Rapid fire. Same question, except what is the worst property or lien you did buy? Yeah.
There's several, right? I'm going to mention those hard lessons that why learn them again. There's always things that when you get into them, you're like, okay, well, I don't know how we would have known that, and I don't know how to necessarily avoid this. Things that happen, right? For example, we bought a property, and actually the property itself was a good property. And we get insurance on every tax deed that we purchase in the partnerships. I don't know. I have my theories that it was a fire started on purpose, but within a couple of days of buying the property, the house burned down. And we, we get insurance and everything. Essentially, submitted out the insurance. Well, the insurance and the fine print basically said, well, it was unoccupied for 60 days, and became this argument of, well, maybe, right? It was boarded up, right? But we'd only owned it for 3 days. So you can't tell us that it's been, vacant for more than 60 days. And at the end of the day, we didn't have enough evidence to say it had been occupied in the last 60 days. And it's kind of the opposite of the innocent until proven guilty. We were more guilty until proved otherwise. And so we bought a property, ended up, losing, pretty massively on that because the house burned down. And now all of a sudden you've got they got to demo the property, and you have demo lien on the property. And so you go upside down real fast. Now that's the only time that has happened. But has happened, and I can't tell people how to avoid that because I don't know how you would try to avoid that. But it happens.
Hey, the too good to be true. You just kind of solve that problem right there. Okay.
Yep.
The book every investor should read.
Well, it's not necessarily investor related, but a recent book that I read that I absolutely loved is called Mindset. And it just goes into every situation, every moment, right? It can be reacted to in multitude of ways, and it's your mindset that will determine how you react to those things. And I like to say I have a positive mindset to begin with, but the book would just reinforce a lot of those thoughts that maybe I thought maybe were unique to me, and realized that they're not, right? People just have different mindsets, and if you're looking at everything from a negative perspective, and there's certainly good use cases for having a negative perspective on something, but great book. Check it out.
Carol Dweck, is that who that is? Carol
that
Dweck?
Sounds correct.
Yeah. And I think that's not like necessarily a new book, maybe within the
Carol
last
Dweck,
20
you
years.
got it.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not a recent book. It's been around. I recently read it, and it was outstanding.
Fantastic. Late night research habit you're willing to admit.
Well, late night for me is nice because it's quiet, like the internet quiet. I'm not getting flooded with messages and emails and questions. And, I find that to be the best time for me to do, I'll say, deep real estate research, right? Is this a market that we want to be in or not? Right. It's a constant. I think people either have 4:30 in the morning, right? 5 in the morning. You read about that. For me, it's late at night when everything else is quieted down. I'm through my urgent items for the day, and I can actually focus on the business and not necessarily in the business from that perspective.
When did you think I might actually lose everything.
When's the latest? I wish that was a one time and only time thing. I guess first time would have been back in 2006, 7, when I was upside down on that property that had the tax lien that sent me in this direction. A more recent one was when COVID, when things started shutting down, and we were just launching the fund. The fund wasn't really a thing yet. We were placing the first roughly $1 million, but Taxable Resources, a software company, was my income. It was the income of about 15 of my team members. And initially it kind of went, well, there's going to be some sales that have to go online, but that shouldn't be too detrimental. And the downside is a lot of states decided to not have sales at all, and so our income went from, I thought, a decent, fairly protected, to a lot larger impact than I thought. And quite frankly, the only reason that we're around today is because of a lot of the stimulus packages that were, PPP funding that helped us stay afloat during that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you today.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. What belief did you use to hold that you now know was completely wrong?
What belief? I think I haven't necessarily had this on a consistent basis, but believing that there's only one solution or one workout strategy for properties is really boxing yourself in. I think it's great to have a target disposition strategy, but also be flexible to the things that can happen and the other opportunities that might arise through the life cycle of that property. And so keeping that mindset, not to plug it again, but keep that mindset and being open-minded and flexible on what you could do with, can be the difference between making okay returns and maybe potentially amazing returns.
Mm. Who do you secretly compare yourself to, even if you know you shouldn't?
Well, I don't know if I want to admit this one, Misha, but compared to or see some similar thoughts, and he's not the most popular guy, and I certainly don't want to be exactly like him, but Elon Musk has been a changer in our world in many respects, like many positive, some negative. But I was an engineer, aerospace engineer by trade, and always kind of had this thought of like, why aren't more engineers business owners? Because I always felt like the bigger picture you can grasp, and the more you understand how things go together, then the bigger organization and more advanced, thing that you could build with whatever that. Now, there's a whole lot of other negative things from, and me included, that come with, being an engineer, getting too hung up on this and et cetera. But I think, Elon's the epitome of what you can do when you think from an engineer's perspective. And I look at so many things he's doing. I'm like, in the people that are competing against him are saying, what he's doing is bad from this perspective, or he's going to fail here. I just like, that guy's playing chess and you're playing checkers. He's thinking 9 steps ahead. He's not worried about this little, hiccup along the way. And so I've always tried to like, how can I have that same mindset of being, I don't worry about patents. We've never patented anything. We've never, I always feel like if we're doing our job and trying to stay several, steps ahead of what our competitors could do and how they would do it, then there's no reason to go down any of those other loopholes. So, and I think Elon has that same methodology. So anyway, that's one person that I would like to I learn from. I don't know if embody is the right word or compare, but I like to learn from them.
I appreciate that. When you picture success, what image actually comes to mind?
Probably a mixture of a great team that I'm not one that needs to be the guy on top of this mountain, like, look, I did it. Because I know full well it's not me that's, doing it. I've been blessed in the team that I have and the, folks that I have on board. I just happen to be, the face of talking to you and doing this. But I'm not the person doing all the work in the background, right? And so I think being able to, look at what we built over time and our team be as excited about what we've built as as I am, that'd be one side of it. And then being able to, participate in my family's life as I have been able to. I have 2 young kids, and one of the reasons I got into doing this as opposed to having, I'll say the 9-to-5er, right? It was not to have more free time, but I do have more flexibility, and I do have the ability to go spend time with my kids at school and not looking back and saying I missed out on some of those moments because I was so focused on building my business. If I can balance those 2 things as we grow over time and be able to look back and say, you know what, I did balance those things, I would be the happiest person in the world.
That's beautiful. That's a nice vision. What's something you wish more people knew about you, but you rarely share?
I hate social situations and speaking to public. Which I think I think I'm an introvert by naturally an introvert, but I've had to learn to be extroverted and communicating and building the business, etc. And talking on podcasts, speaking with you today. But and I think I've told people that, and they're like, but it's like, no, I am extremely nervous, uncomfortable, and don't like every second that I am on camera or on mic. That is not my natural state.
It's good. Okay. When was the last time you cried and why?
Well, I recently had my uncle passed away in December, and we went out. He had a celebration of life, I guess 2 weeks ago, out in Montana, where I'm originally from, and celebrations of life, you're crying for multiple reasons, but that was the most recent.
Thank you for that. Love Montana. I got my finance degree out of Montana State and grew up in Jackson, Wyoming. So I'm very familiar with that.
Nice.
With that country. Yeah. Yeah. When family passes and we have an opportunity to show up and feel those emotions and be supportive and all those things boy, it's kind of wild, right? That circle of life moment.
Yes. Yeah. Wild is a great word.
Yeah. How do you personally deal with imposter syndrome when it shows up?
Well, I don't know, and it shows up regularly, of feeling like I don't deserve this, right? Or, I think I try to remind myself there's a lot of people out there that have been in this scenario and maybe aren't doing it for the right reasons or have the right end goal in mind. And so I try to tell myself, like, why can't I be one of those people and trying to do it from the right perspective and the right mindset, and not just do it from a pure greed, I guess, is probably the what I'm trying to avoid. And so when I look at it, it's like, if decent human beings are going to have to do this, why can't that be me? That's, I guess, the question that I ask myself.
I love that. That's a great lens to look at something through, and it's super service oriented as well. It's like, hey, how can I serve here versus how can I make my fortune or what have you. I think is what I was hearing
Exactly.
you say.
Yeah.
What's a non-business habit or ritual that helps keep you sane?
For me, I tell my wife this. My church is the woods. I grew up in Montana, camping basically every weekend in the summer, and so that's my piece here. And when I moved to Northeast Ohio, I've grown to truly love Northeast Ohio because of the outdoor space that is here. There's a national park within 5 minutes of my house. The city is outstanding in its green spaces and the city parks and the metro parks that it creates. And so every time I need to think, right, in whatever form, personal, business, I go for a run, hike, right, off trail through the woods, and it is a great thinking time. And whatever it is about being in nature, it certainly helps enable that for me.
Love that. That's beautiful. Is that part of the Northeast Ohio where you're living? Is that growing, contracting, stable?
Well, it contracted for many, many years. I think it's finally to where it's fairly stable. I think there's a couple counties that have reported, some growth, not like, create some of the crazy areas in the U.S. like Denver. And I like to think it's kind of a hidden gem. The weather here is fantastic for most of the year. There's about 3 months where it's cold in winter. Outside of that, it's pretty nice. And so I think it's a hidden gem. We'll see if more people continue to find that hidden gem and it explodes again. I guess there's positives and negatives that come with that.
Yeah. I know I'm always interested in where people live, and I think there's so many people look outside of the United States and where I need to travel, where I need to go to have that experience. And it's like there's so many cool, rich places right within the United States.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
What park is that? The national park that you're by?
Called Cuyahoga Valley National Park. It's a If it's not the most recent addition, it's very because I think it finally created in the 70s. Now, from a national park standpoint, it's a little weird when they pieced it all together. You can be driving through the national park, and all of a sudden there's a farm, and so it's a little different than many of the other national parks. Growing up in Montana, we got Yellowstone and Glacier, right? It's very different than those. But just having the local mindset of the people that want to preserve something, right? I think is and they timed that with around the same time the burning river. If anybody's heard of the Cuyahoga River, actually lit on fire because of fumes from the toxicity and the waste. And so that was the low point, right? And it's gotten better and better. And today I don't think you'd have any clue that happened in the 70s. So it's cool to watch, cool to be a part of.
Yeah. I've got three more questions. I do want to be cognizant of time. So you just got three more to go. This has
All
been
right.
amazing. And I appreciate your openness. This is super fun. What is something that you used to chase that you've now let go of?
Um, the perfect, just perfection in general. I think it's admired to shoot for perfection, but to expect it is a very different thing. And I think, having kids definitely helped me better understand that, it's admirable to shoot for that, but don't expect it. It's a nuance, but I think a very important nuance.
Yeah, that's good. Like that. What's the weirdest thing in your notes app right now?
The weirdest thing in my notes app. Oh boy. I don't know if it's weird, but I guess the crazy off topic. I volunteer here locally to test water within our um, watershed, and so I've forgotten the last 2 weeks, and so I had to make it big and bold, and I got to get it done by the end of May, and so it's got to happen this Saturday or not. So it's very high priority for me to get done this week.
That's a good one. I love that. All right, last question. What's one conspiracy theory you kind of believe?
That I kind of believe. I don't know if there's a specific conspiracy. Well, here, this one's a lot more interesting, probably. I do believe in extraterrestrial life out there. I don't know that I'm convinced that they visited us, but the more and more I've learned of like how massive the universe is and how like we are on this planet and what we're doing, and to think that we're the only ones out there that are intelligent life forms, I think is pretty small minded, right? I don't know if that's the right word. I think, anyway, I certainly believe that there's other intelligent life out there, at least trying, if not have already communicated with us in some form or fashion. I have not personally experienced it. Don't necessarily want to, but
I, I love it. That's a good one. How about naive? It's naive to think that we're the only intelligent life.
there you go. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right. This has been amazing. That's a wrap for this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. Big thanks to you, Brian, for bringing the goods. Ton of fun. For everybody listening, watching, if this episode sparked something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and check out tax sales resources. Wait, taxsaleresources.com to go deeper. Taxsaleresources.com to go deeper. Was there any other thing you wanted to plug, or is that the best?
No, I express my gratitude to you, Misha, and this has been fun. I love organic conversation. Hopefully, the folks listening didn't get too bored in my long stories, but for anybody that's still listening, right, and found it interesting and wants to reach out, I'm more than happy to talk to you. I look forward to connecting. So, thank you, Misha, for making it happen.
Fantastic. Until next time, everybody, stay focused, stay bold, and let's go speak on some podcasts. Brian, I'll hit stop and we'll say goodbye offline. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. For resources to help you sell your stuff, go to belove.media/resources. That's belove.media/resources. And be sure to subscribe, comment, 5-star, and share. Thank you again for listening.